Welcome to Soft Mystic Stories. Tonight, we stand at the edge of a mound in the Jordan Valley where the earth rises quietly above the plain and where archaeologists have uncovered something that still feels older than certainty itself. In the 1950s, the British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon led careful excavations at Tel Es Sultan, the ancient mound of Jericho, and her work changed how scholars understood the deep beginnings of settled human life. Later research by universities, museums, and field teams across Britain, America, and the Near East would return again to the same troubling question. How could people living so long before kings, writing, bronze, or wheels build a place that already looked strangely organized? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quiet around you, right where you are watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world, it is a small modern ritual. Really, a scatter of names and hours glowing beneath a story that began when clocks did not exist. You are not entering a city of marble avenues or palace gates. You are entering something humble, blur, older, and perhaps more unsettling. Jericho around 9000 BC is a gathering place of mud, stone, plaster, smoke, grain, and memory. Its people do not leave you royal inscriptions. They do not carve triumphant kings into temple walls. They do not explain themselves with tidy labels for tired historians, which is frankly inconsiderate of them. They leave walls. They leave a tower. They leave buried floors, tools, bones, and the quiet trace of hands. The mound itself rests near a spring, a precious source of life in a landscape where water can feel almost supernatural. Today, archaeologists know the site as Tel Es Sultan, a layered hill made not by nature alone, but by thousands of years of living, building, collapsing, and rebuilding. Each generation adds to the ground beneath it. Each roof becomes a floor. Each ruin becomes a foundation. A city in this way is not only built upward, it is also buried inward. You stand there in your imagination as evening loosens across the valley. The air is warm and dust clings softly to your skin. Somewhere beyond the settlement, reeds stir near water. Birds call and vanish into the dimness. The smell is not romantic in any polished museum sense. It is damp earth, animal hide, old smoke, crushed grass, and the faint sourness of people living closely together. This is the beginning, or something close to it. Records from excavation confirm that Jericho was occupied very early during the period scholars called the pre-pottery Neolithic. That phrase sounds dry, almost sleepy in the wrong way, but it simply means a time before people in this region were making pottery, yet already building permanent homes. Researchers at institutions such as Oxford and the University of Chicago have long examined this transition from wandering life to settled villages, and Jericho remains one of the most famous examples. It does not sit neatly inside our easy story of progress. It arrives too early, too confidently, like a footprint found in a locked room. You may picture history as a staircase. First hunters wander, then farmers settle, then villages grow, then cities rise, then kings appear with taxes, armies, and the usual administrative headache. Jericho makes that staircase feel a little uneven. It suggests that people were experimenting with permanence long before the expected signs of civilization appeared. The walls are the first green at mystery. Not because stone walls are impossible. Of course, people with enough time, need, and stubbornness can move remarkable amounts of stone. The mystery is why they did it then. Why did a community without writing, without metal tools, and without known centralized kingship invest labor in such a structure? Was the wall defensive? Was it meant to hold back floodwater and mud? Was it a boundary between the living and the dangerous world beyond? Scholars still debate this carefully. Some argue that the wall and tower show social organization on an impressive scale. Others suggest practical concerns, especially protection from seasonal runoff. A few interpret the structures through ritual or symbolic meaning, wondering whether they shaped how early people understood safety, identity, and belonging. The honest answer is that no single explanation has defeated all the others. That uncertainty is where the story breathes. Your mind drifts toward the people who raised those stones. They are not anonymous because they lacked faces. They are anonymous because time has taken their names. You imagine them at dawn when the valley is cooler and the horizon is pale. Men, women, and children move through narrow spaces between round houses. Someone carries water. Someone grinds grain. Someone tends a fire that smolders low and patient. Someone watches the wall, not as a tourist would, but as a thing that has cost muscle, hunger, planning, and perhaps fear. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath this scene. Jericho's early settlement included substantial stone architecture, including a wall and a tower dated to the early Neolithic period. Archaeological analysis places these features around the 10th millennium BC, though exact dates shift with new measurements and interpretations. That is not a minor detail. It means these stones were placed thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt, before Stonehenge, before the first known writing systems of Mesopotamia. The pyramids are ancient to us. Jericho was ancient to them. That thought changes the scale of everything. When Egyptians of the Old Kingdom raised limestone monuments toward the sun, Jericho's oldest tower already belonged to a past so distant that even memory may have worn thin. The people of 2500 BC were not standing at the beginning of civilization. They were already late arrivals in a much older, human experiment. There is a quirky tidbit here, small, but strange enough to linger. Some early Jericho homes had floors made with plaster so smooth and pale that they almost seem carefully prepared for display. The plaster was made by burning limestone, a process requiring high heat and planning. Imagine that. Before pottery becomes common, before elegant tableware and palace jars, someone cares enough about a floor to make it shine. Humanity begins domestic comfort earlier than expected. Apparently, because even in 9000 BC, nobody wants a disappointing living room. The humor fades quickly when you think about what such floors mean. They mean settlement. They mean repetition. They mean people waking in the same rooms, returning to the same hearths, sweeping the same surfaces, and marking time through daily tasks rather than endless movement. Home becomes not just a shelter, but a memory machine. The wall outside gathers those homes into something larger. It tells the body where inside ends and outside begins. Inside there is water, grain, voices, smoke, infants, elders, sleeping mats, stored seeds, and the dead beneath the floors. Outside there are animals, strangers, store, hunger, and the dark sweep of open land. Perhaps the wall is not only stone. Perhaps it is a thought. You can feel that thought forming slowly like cooling plaster. A group of people begins to say, without writing it down, "This place is ours. This spring, this mound, this cluster of homes, this circle of labor and fear belongs to those who remain." And in that remaining, something changes in the human mind. The old wandering horizon does not vanish completely. People still hunt, gather, travel, exchange, and watch the seasons. Yet now, there is a center. There is a point to return to. There is a place that remembers footprints. The ground itself becomes an archive. A cautious phrase appears often in scholarly discussions of early Jericho. Researchers continue to disagree about whether it should be called a city in the full sense. Some prefer the term large village because there is no clear evidence of writing, formal government, streets, palaces, and/or specialized districts. Others point to its scale, its architecture, its long occupation, and its symbolic power, and ask whether our definition of city is too strict. Maybe we expect ancient people to fill out a modern checklist version. Eerie helpful of us, naturally. Yet the question matters. If Jericho is a city, then urban life begins not with kings and accountants, but with water, walls, and shared labor. If it is not a city, then it is still something equally fascinating. It is a threshold place, neither wandering camp nor later metropolis, but a human experiment in staying. The sun lowers, shadows stretch across the old mound. You imagine the stone wall taking the last light along its uneven face. It is not grand in the later imperial sense. It does not shout. It endures. The silence around it is not empty, because buried beneath that silence are footsteps, arguments, songs, coughing fires, crying children, and the soft scrape of tools against stone. And there, in the settling dark, the mystery becomes gentler and deeper. Jericho does not answer you directly. It invites you to listen to a time when history had not yet learned to write itself down, but had already begun arranging stones in the shape of belonging. Your mind drifts downward into the valley where the land sinks below the level of the sea and the air seems heavier than ordinary air. The hills of Judea rise to the west, pale and folded, while beyond the eastern haze, the mountains of Moab hold the last soft light. Between them lies a corridor of warmth, salt, reeds, stones, and water, a strange green wound in a dry world. The spring is the secret, not gold, not armies, not royal commands. Water. It comes from the earth with patient insistence, gathering in clear movement near the mound, feeding the plants that cling to life around it for people living at the edge of arid country. Such a spring is not just useful. It is a promise repeated every morning. You can almost hear it in the hush, bubbling faintly beneath birdsong and insect noise, saying the same thing again and again. Stay here. Stay near. The valley smells different from the ridges above it. There is damp mud near the water, sharp grasses crushed underfoot, and the mineral scent of stone warmed all day by the sun. In shaded places, the air carries the green odor of reeds and wet roots. Farther away, dust waits in the open, dry enough to coat lips and eyelashes. You breathe both worlds at once, water and thirst, shelter and exposure, life and warning. This is what makes Jericho feel less like an accident. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. Archaeologists, ninth environmental researchers, have long noted that Jericho's earliest growth depended on its spring and its position near routes through the Jordan Valley. Studies from major research centers, including American universities that examine early agriculture and landscape archaeology, describe this region as a vital meeting ground between desert margins, fertile pockets, and seasonal movement. It was not a random dot on a map. It was a place where land itself offered an argument for settlement. You can imagine that argument in simple terms. The spring provides water. The valley floor offers plants, animals, and workable ground. The surrounding slopes provide stone, wild resources, and lookout points. Travel routes pass near enough for contact, exchange, and perhaps uneasy encounters. In a world without roads as you know them, geography is the first road builder. Feet follow water. Memory follows feet. A breeze moves low through the reeds. It is not cool exactly, but it shifts the heat against your face. Somewhere nearby, a bird lifts suddenly from the marshy edge. Wings beating once, twice, then vanishing into gold air. The sound feels enormous in the quiet because ancient landscapes are never silent. They simply speak without machines. You notice the ground beneath you. It is uneven, layered, and stubborn. There are patches of packed earth, loose pebbles, old ash, broken stone, and places where dampness darkens the soil. With dampness darkens the soil, your sandals would pick up grit. Your palms would feel rough surfaces if you steadied yourself against a wall. Nothing here is polished for visitors. This is a living place, not a museum display, though the museum will later arrive with labels and very serious lighting. Around the spring, the earliest settlers find more than water. They find rhythm. The day begins before the sun grows harsh. People move in practiced patterns, carrying skins or containers, checking stored food, watching children, gathering plants, shaping tools, and listening for animals beyond the settlement edge. At midday, heat presses everything downward. Even speech may slow. By evening, the valley breathes again, and shadows lengthen across mud walls and stone. One quirky tidbit rises from the wider world of early settlement. In several Neolithic communities of the Near East, people showed surprising attention to surfaces, colors, and household order. Floors could be replaced, altered, walls renewed, spaces carefully swept, and objects placed with meaning. So yes, long before written property deeds, somebody may already have been quietly irritated that someone else tracked mud indoors. Civilization begins with water management, food storage, and possibly the first household complaint. Yet, beneath that faint smile sits a more serious idea. Staying in one place changes the body. It changes how you sleep, how you remember, how you fear, and how you imagine the future. A mobile band carries its world through stories and tools. A settled group also carries its world in walls, hearths, paths, and buried remains. The landscape becomes part of the mind. The valley teaches this slowly. It teaches by repetition. Morning light on the spring. Afternoon heat on stone. Night sounds in the reeds. In your ears, the small noises grow distinct. You hear the scrape of grinding stones from inside a house. You hear a child laugh, then get hushed by someone older. You hear a dog or half-wild scavenger nosing near refuel. You hear the faint thud of someone repairing a wall with wet mud, pressing it flat with a practiced hand. Each sound is ordinary. Together, they are revolutionary because the great transformation is not only that people settle. It is that ordinary life becomes attached to a fixed place. A woman knows which patch of shade will last longest. A child knows where the ground dips near the spring. An elder remembers when a wall line stood farther back. Memory becomes local. The world gets smaller but deeper. There is an open scholarly debate here, and it remains alive, because landscapes can be read in more than one way. Some researchers emphasize climate and resource abundance, seeing Jericho as a practical response to water and food opportunity. Others, including scholars influenced by social archaeology at institutions such as Yale and Stanford, stress human choice, identity, and ritual attachment. Did people settle because the valley made life easier, or because certain places became meaningful beyond survival? The safest answer is frustratingly elegant. Probably both. You feel that double pull near the spring. It is obviously practical. No one needs a mystical lecture to understand thirst. Yet humans rarely live by practicality alone. A spring that saves your children becomes more than water. A mound where elders are buried becomes more than soil. A wall raised by many hands becomes more than protection. Over generations, use becomes memory, and memory becomes belonging. The valley itself seems to hold those layers. In the distance, the Dead Sea lies unseen but present, a basin of salt and brightness. The Jordan River moves through the broader rift, sometimes generous, sometimes elusive, never merely a blue line on a map. Animals pass through the margins, drawn by vegetation and water. Gazelle, birds, foxes, and smaller creatures shape human attention. Every movement matters when the world is read by tracks, calls, and broken stems. The people here are not isolated dreamers waiting for civilization to happen to them. They are alert, skilled, and socially entangled. They know seasons, they know stone, They know plants that fill the stomach, plants that heal, and plants best avoided unless one enjoys a dramatic evening. They likely trade materials, ideas, and marriage partners across distances. Obsidian found in Neolithic contexts elsewhere reminds scholars that early communities were sometimes connected through surprisingly wide networks. The ancient world is old, yes, but not simple. As dusk gathers, the spring darkens to a narrow shimmer. Smoke rises from hearths and folds into the cooling air. The settlement does not glow like a later city, but it breathes with many small fires. You sense how fragile it all is. A dry year could hurt it, a conflict could scar it, disease could move through close houses, a flood could rearrange the ground with terrifying ease. Still, people remain. They remain because the valley gives enough. They remain because the spring speaks from below. They remain because returning to the same place can feel like control in a world that refuses to be controlled. And perhaps while night settles over reeds and stone, you begin to understand why this low, hot, shimmering landscape could hold one of humanity's earliest experiments in permanence, not comfort, not certainty, a foothold. For a moment, it feels as though the calendar has dissolved beneath your feet, and the number 9000 BC stops being a date. It becomes a distance. It stretches away from you like a plain in moonlight, wider than imagination first allows. You are standing in a world before pharaohs, before Sumerian scribes, before the first cities of Mesopotamia, before bronze blades, before wheels, before the heavy machinery of states. There is no empire here. There is no palace. There is no written law. And yet, there are people who remain in one place long enough for the ground to remember them. That is the quiet astonishment of early Jericho. It exists in a time when humanity is still learning what permanence might cost. The settlement is not a city in the later sense with gates, markets, rulers, and formal streets. It is something stranger because it stands near the beginning of the experiment. Before anyone knows where that experiment will lead, you move through the settlement while dawn lifts slowly over the valley. The first light touches mud walls, rough stone, baskets, sleeping mats, and the curved outlines of small dwellings. These homes are not arranged with the polished order of later towns. They cluster, press, shift, and adapt. Their forms feel organic, like nests shaped by repeated need. A doorway opens low. A roof is reached by letter or packed steps. A wall leans slightly, then is repaired with fresh mud. The people here do not think of themselves as prehistoric. Nobody does. That word belongs to later scholars sitting under electric lights and trying not to spill coffee on excavation reports. For the people of Jericho, this is simply life. The sun rises, the spring flows, food must be gathered, prepared, guarded, shared, and stored. Children must be watched. Tools must be sharpened. Fires must be fed. The dead must be remembered. One mainstream historical fact gives this scene its weight. Archaeologists identify early Jericho as part of the pre-pottery Neolithic, a horizon, a period when communities in the Levant began to build more substantial settlements before pottery became common. Research discussed by scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Harvard, and the University of Chicago places Jericho among the most important early examples of this shift. Its age unsettles easy assumptions because it shows complex communal life before many familiar markers of civilization. You may expect farming to appear fully formed, like a neat invention with a launch date. It does not. The shift into settled life is uneven, experimental, and full of uncertainty. People collect wild cereals. They learn which stands ripen reliably. They return to useful places. They store more. They interfere more, slowly, almost invisibly. Landscapes begin to change under human attention. Plants do not wake up one morning domesticated. Humans do not wake up one morning civilized. Both are drawn into a long relationship of pressure, habit, and consequence around you. That process feels intimate. A person kneels with a grinding stone, rocking another stone over seeds until flour gathers in pale dust. The motion is repetitive, heavy, and exhausting. Another person sorts gathered plants, separating useful grains from chaff, grit, and stubborn little fragments that would make anyone's teeth deeply unhappy. Nearby, someone repairs a basket, threading fibers with the kind of patience that never appears in heroic legends, because apparently heroes prefer swords to household maintenance. The scent of the settlement thickens as the morning warms. Smoke from hearths folds into the smell of wet clay, crushed seed, animal skin, and human closeness. You hear coughing, murmured voices, grinding, scraping, and the creak of woven materials under weight. Here the ancient world is not silent. It is busy in small ways. Its greatness is not announced by trumpets. It is hidden in repetition. This is where the mystery deepens. Jericho has no known king at this stage, yet people cooperate. It has no written bureaucracy, yet labor is organized. It has no army preserved in records, yet a wall rises around part of the settlement. Something holds the group together. Kinship, ritual, shared danger, seasonal need, collective memory, or some mixture of all these forces may have shaped daily life. The system is present but unnamed. A quirky fringe tidbit follows Jericho wherever the public imagination goes. Some modern writers have suggested that such early architecture must imply forgotten visitors, lost high cultures, or wisdom handed down from vanished survivors of some unknown catastrophe. It is an enticing thought on a quiet night, especially if one has enjoyed too many dramatic documentaries. Yet, the stones do not require impossible teachers. They require human beings with memory, social pressure, practical skill, and enough need to move heavy things together. Still, the fascination is understandable. Jericho appears so early that it feels almost misplaced. The mind wants a missing chapter. It wants someone to step from the shadows and explain why a tower stands in the earth. Before Egypt raises pyramids, before Mesopotamia writes accounts, before later civilization, NS become loud enough to dominate textbooks. But perhaps the missing chapter is not about outsiders. Perhaps it is about underestimating ordinary people. You pause near one of the dwellings and imagine its interior. Light enters indirectly, softened by doorway and roof opening. The floor is smooth with use. Tools rest near the wall. A woven mat lies rolled or flattened. Food is stored in containers that are not ceramic pots, because pottery has not yet become the everyday solution. Materials are perishable, clever, and easily lost to time. Wood, fiber, leather, reed, and woven forms carry daily life, then vanish, leaving stone and bone to speak too loudly. This creates a scholarly problem. Archaeology preserves the durable and loses the delicate. The hard things survive, the soft things disappear. So later observers may imagine early life as rougher than it was simply because comfort rotted away. A wooden bowl, a woven cradle, a decorated mat, a painted wall, a personal charm. These may disappear without apology. The vanished world may have been richer, warmer, and more colorful than the surviving fragments allow. An open scholarly debate rests exactly there. Researchers continue to discuss how socially complex pre-pottery Neolithic communities really were and how much can be inferred from architecture alone. Some scholars argue that large communal structures indicate leadership or coordinated authority. Others caution that cooperation does not automatically mean hierarchy and that small-scale communities can organize impressive labor through kinship and shared ritual. The debate remains careful because power can leave faint traces when no writing explains it. In the settlement, authority might not wear a crown. It might be an elder whose memory matters. It might be a ritual specialist whose words calm fear. It might be a skilled builder whose judgment prevents collapse. It might be a group of households negotiating decisions through obligation, gossip, respect, and the ancient political force known as nobody wanting to be the useless neighbor. You sense that life here is both communal and tense. Close living creates support, but also friction. A stored harvest can feed a family, and it can also attract envy. A water source saves lives, and it can also create disputes. A wall defines belonging, and every definition excludes something. The first settled places may have offered security, but security is never free. It asks people to coordinate, compromise, and remember who owes what to whom. The day advances, heat presses down into the settlement. People withdraw into shade or continue tasks with slower movements. A child watches dust move through a blade of sunlight. An older person sits near a doorway, hands resting on knees, eyes fixed toward the spring. The world seems small, yet every smallness carries consequence. Each stored seed suggests tomorrow. Each repaired wall argues against leaving. Each buried memory ties the living more tightly to the mound long before recorded history. Jericho is not yet the city of later imagination. It is not a kingdom, not a capital, not a place of written names, but it is already a threshold. It shows humanity standing between movement and settlement, between season and schedule, between landscape and home. In that threshold, something begins that will never entirely stop. The earth is learning to hold us, and we are learning to stay. The ground opens in your imagination, not violently, but slowly, like a memory being brushed clear by careful hands. Dust lifts in soft brown veils. Stones appear where no casual wand would expect them. Their surfaces are worn, irregular, and patient. Then the shape begins to make itself known. Not a house, not a storage pit, not an ordinary wall line. A tower rises from the buried earth, ancient beyond comfort, and older than almost every monument your mind first reaches for. It is not tall by modern standards, still, it changes everything. The stone tower of early Jericho stands as one of the most mysterious structures of the Neolithic world. Archaeologists uncovered it within the ancient settlement layers, built of undressed stones and connected with the settlement wall. Its preserved height reaches several meters, and inside it was a narrow stairway descending or ascending, depending on how the mind chooses to enter it. That stairway is the detail that lingers. A tower is impressive. A stairway inside a tower becomes almost personal. You picture your hand touching the stone. It is rough, warm on the outer face, cooler in the shadowed interior. The air smells of limestone dust, dry soil, and age. A faint mineral taste seems to settle on the tongue. There is no inscription telling you what this place meant. No carved figure points toward a god, number. Royal boast declares who commanded the work. The tower gives you mass, labor, and silence. A mainstream historical fact remains firm beneath the mystery. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations in the mid-10th century brought Jericho's Neolithic tower to scholarly attention, and later studies placed it among the earliest known large-scale stone monuments. Researchers at universities such as Cambridge, Oxford, and American institutions studying early architecture have treated the tower as evidence of organized communal labor before later urban states. It belongs to a world without pottery as a daily norm. Yet it already contains monumental ambition. That phrase, monumental ambition, feels almost too grand at first. You might imagine ambition needs kings, titles, rival courts, and someone wearing entirely too much jewelry. But ambition can also be communal. It can be the decision to build something that no single family needs alone. It can be the strange human urge to turn effort into visible permanence. It can be a structure that says, in stone, we are here and we know how to act together. The tower may have taken thousands of work hours. Stones had to be selected, carried, placed, and stabilized. The stairway required planning, not just piling. Someone understood weight, balance, access, and internal space. Someone imagined the final form before it was complete, even without written plans. The builders held a design in shared memory. That is not primitive. That is deeply human. You step inward now into the imagined stair passage. The walls close slightly around you. Light narrows. The sound outside dulls until the settlement becomes a murmur. Sandals scrape stone. Your shoulder nearly brushes the side. The stair is steep enough to make each movement deliberate. It is easy to understand why this feature has captured so much attention. It creates a journey inside the monument, a small passage from brightness into shadow or from shadow into brightness. Some researchers have suggested the tower served practical functions. It may have been part of a defensive system, a lookout or a structure connected to the wall. Others have proposed that it helped control movement, mark territory, or organize communal activity. Then there are symbolic interpretations, quieter and stranger. Perhaps the towers shaped ritual experience. Perhaps it aligned with light, shadow, horizon, or seasonal perception. Perhaps it gave the community a shared object of awe. Here, the open scholarly debate becomes especially alive. A number of archaeologists view the tower through the practical needs of settlement, while others explore its social and ritual meanings. Some studies have even considered whether its form and position may relate to the setting sun or nearby landscape features. Scholars at respected institutions continue to disagree, not because evidence is useless, but because the structure refuses to confess. Stone is honest about existing. It is less helpful about intention. That is the trouble with monuments. They are loud and mute at the same time. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the tower like desert dust. In popular speculation, it has sometimes been imagined as an ancient observatory, a power symbol, a refuge, or even a remnant of knowledge from a forgotten age. The more adventurous versions drift far beyond evidence, naturally wearing a very confident hat. Still, the fascination has a real source. The tower feels too deliberate to be dismissed, yet too early to be easily explained. It sits in the mind, like a locked door. You return to the outside and look across the sea. Titi Lement. Mud houses huddle near the wall. Smoke rises thinly from hearths. The spring glints beyond movement and dust. Children pass between adults carrying tools and bundles. Dogs or scavenging animals nose at discarded material. Life continues around the monument. That may be its strangest quality. It is not isolated on a sacred mountain. It stands within the ordinary breath of the settlement. Perhaps people passed it daily. Perhaps they barely looked at it. Or perhaps they felt its presence every time they moved near the wall. A monument does not need constant ceremony to shape the mind. A church bell tower shapes a village even when the bell is silent. A courthouse shapes a town even when no trial is being held. A tower in Neolithic Jericho may have worked in a similar way, not as the same institution, but as a fixed center of attention and memory. You imagine its building. The scene is not clean. There is sweat, argument, fatigue, and dust stuck to damp skin. Someone cuts a foot on stone. Someone laughs at the wrong moment. Someone older complains that the younger ones are stacking badly because apparently engineering criticism is one of humanity's oldest renewable resources. Yet the work continues basket by basket, stone by stone. The tower grows. The labor itself may have mattered as much as the finished form. Building together binds people through shared exhaustion. It creates obligation. It creates stories. It creates a memory that can be retold whenever someone asks why the stones stand there. Those who built it become part of it. Those born later inherit not just a structure, but a claim. Our people made this. Our hands, our elders, our dead. The tower also changes time. A hut can be repaired or replaced quickly. A tower asks the future to notice it. It survives seasons, perhaps generations, perhaps longer than anyone expected. In a world where many objects are perishable, the tower has a different voice. It says that some actions are meant to outlast their makers. That idea is simple, but it is not small. The sun lowers against the western heights. Light touches the tower at an angle, catching stone edges in gold and leaving deep seams in shade. If the structure had any connection with the sky, this is when you might feel it, not as proof, not as certainty, more as atmosphere. The builders lived under a sky that governed heat, seasons, darkness, and direction. It would be stranger if they never looked up. At night, the tower becomes another kind of presence. The settlement fires glow low, shadows thicken around the wall. The tower is less visible, but perhaps more felt. It stands where people know it stands, heavy in the dark. Beyond it lies the uncertain world outside the settlement, with animal calls, moving wind, and distances the eye cannot hold. Inside, people sleep near stored food, tools, children, ancestors, and unfinished tasks. The tower does not solve Jericho. It deepens it. It shows that these early people were not merely surviving beside a spring. They were shaping space, organizing effort, and creating forms that carried meaning beyond immediate hunger. Whether it guarded, gathered, warned, impressed, measured, or sanctified, it required a community willing to imagine stone as more than stone. And so you leave it standing there in the valley dusk, older than pyramids, older than written hymns, older than the names of the builders themselves. Its stairway waits in silence. Its stones hold their ancient weight. Its purpose remains partly hidden, as though the first monument in the earth was never meant to explain self completely. The scent changes as you move inward from stone and open heat into the quieter world of work. Here, the ancient settlement is not defined by mystery alone. It is defined by hands. Hands that lift water, press mud, cut reeds, smooth plaster, grind seeds, twist fiber, shape stone, carry infants, and close the eyes of the dead. Great monuments draw attention naturally because stones are dramatic and refuse to decompose, but daily life is where a place truly becomes human. You notice the walls first. They are not the cold, clean walls of a modern house. They are made from earth, softened with water, strengthened with plant material, and pressed into useful form. Some walls curve gently. Some rise from stone foundations. Some show repairs, patches, and the quiet evidence of repeated care. A home is never finished in such a world. It is always drying, cracking, being mended, being lived into shape. The floor beneath your imagined feet is firm and pale. It may be plastered, smoothed, renewed, that matters. It tells you that people here are not merely hiding from weather. They are arranging space. They are making interiors more comfortable, more durable, and perhaps more meaningful. Fulful. A floor is a humble thing until you realize it is where children crawl, grain is sorted, tools are kept, meals are shared, and stories are repeated. Records from excavation confirm that early Jericho contained round or oval domestic structures, plastered surfaces, stone tools, and evidence of settled household life. Research from leading archaeological programs at institutions such as Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago has often used sites like Jericho to explore how domestic labor shaped the Neolithic transformation. The first Great Revolution may not have sounded like conquest. It may have sounded like grinding stones moving before sunrise. You hear that sound now? slow, heavy, repeated. A person kneels at a pushing and pulling a handstone across grain. The body leans into the task, shoulders tighten, dust gathers on fingers. This is not a decorative moment in a documentary. It is work that can reshape bones over years. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have often found patterns of wear connected to repetitive labor. The body keeps records when writing does not. Beside the grinding area, baskets hold gathered seeds or other materials. Some are gly woven, others rougher, suited to different tasks. Most such baskets vanish from archaeological view unless preserved by rare conditions. So, you must imagine them from traces, impressions, comparisons, and common sense. The ancient world was full of perishable intelligence. Fiber, wood, leather, and red did much of the work, then disappeared like breath on cold glass. A quirky tidbit rests in the craft of plaster itself. To make lime plaster, people had to heat limestone to high temperatures, then mix and apply it with skill. That means fuel gathering, fire control, timing, and knowledge passed from one person to another. So long before anyone in the region is writing recipes, someone knows how to cook stone, not soup. Stone. Humanity has always been a little unreasonable, by which may be one reason it builds cities. You picture the process. Limestone is collected and burned. Fuel is consumed. Smoke rises. The material changes under heat, becoming something that can be mixed, spread, and polished. It is labor-intensive, perhaps too labor-intensive, for casual use. That suggests value. A plastered floor may show pride, cleanliness, ritual concern, status, or simply the satisfactory ion of making a living space better. The truth may include all of these at once. Your hand passes over a wall where fresh mud has dried against older layers. The texture is uneven. Tiny plant fibers catch at the skin. There are fingerprints somewhere in such material, though most are lost or overlooked. A thumb pressed too hard, a palm smoothing a seam, a child's curious touch before being told, probably with ancient irritation, to stop ruining the wall. Some things are eternal. The tools are small but eloquent. Flint blades, scrapers, grinding stones, bone implements, and stone axes speak of a world where everything useful takes time to make. A broken blade is not just trash. It is lost effort. A good tool is not just an object. It is a stored skill. People learn where stone can be found, how it fractures, how edges behave, and how a tool feels when it is right. Knowledge lives in the muscles as much as in the mind. An open scholarly debate surrounds the division of labor in early settled communities. Some researchers argue that growing settlement size encouraged specialized tasks, with certain people becoming more skilled in building tool making, ritual practice, or food processing. There's caution that evidence for full specialization remains limited at such early dates, and that many households may have shared a broad range of skills. The debate continues because daily work leaves traces that are intimate, scattered, and easily misread inside a dwelling. You sense how crowded life might be. Storage takes space. Sleeping takes space. Work takes space. Smoke must escape somehow. Insects are not politely absent, nor are smells, dried plants, hides, bodies, ash, cooked food, damp earth, and old refuse mingle in the close air. We often imagine the past as distant and golden, but it was also itchy, smoky, and badly ventilated. History, regrettably, did not come with air conditioning. Yet, this closeness also creates warmth. People know one another's rhythms. They recognize footsteps, coughs, moods, and silences. A child grows up surrounded by skilled gestures. Nobody needs to explain everything in words. You learn by watching. You learn when someone places your hands correctly on a tool. You learn when an elder sigh because you are doing it wrong. Again, outside the settlement moves in patterns of labor. Some people bring water from the spring, others gather fuel, hers tend stored food, maintain walls, prepare meals, or shape materials. Work changes with season, age, strength, and knowledge. The young carry, fetch, imitate, and test boundaries. Adults bear heavy responsibilities. Elders may hold memory, instruction, ritual authority, or simply the priceless ability to know what happened last time everyone made this particular mistake. Households may be connected by kinship, marriage, obligation, and shared projects. A dwelling is not isolated. Its life spills into neighboring spaces. Food preparation, repair, conversation, and conflict happen in sight and sound of others. Privacy, as modern people understand it, may be limited. Community is support, but also exposure. Your business is rarely entirely your own. Very cozy, very stressful. The more you look, the more the settlement becomes a web of small decisions. Where to place the hearth, which wall to mend first, how much grain to store, when to share, whom to trust, whether to join a communal task, whether to leave a broken tool for later repair. These choices seem minor, yet they are the building blocks of permanence. The first settled worlds are made from thousands of ordinary acts repeated, until they become tradition. You pause near a doorway as evening returns. Warm air moves across your face, carrying smoke and crushed herbs. Someone inside laughs softly. Someone outside speaks in a low voice while scraping a tool edge. The spring continues beyond the houses, steady and indifferent. Above the sky darkens with a slow, violet clarity in this softer light. The builders of Jericho become less mysterious and more moving. They are not symbols. They are not merely the creators of a wall or tower. They are tired people with aching hands, clever solutions, stubborn habits, and memories tied to rooms. They live close to the ground, but not without imagination. They shape mud into shelter, stone into tools, lime into smooth floors, and repeated labor into a world. And perhaps this is where the oldest city begins most truly, not in the monument that survives, but in the hand that repairs a wall, because tomorrow matters. The room grows quieter as your attention lowers toward the floor, because, in Jericho, the dead are not always far away. They are not placed in distant cemeteries beyond the edge of living memory. They can rest beneath the houses, under plastered surfaces, under mats, under the daily movement of bare feet. The home is not only a shelter for the living, it is also a chamber of remembering. This is where the story becomes unsettling, but gently so. You step into a dwelling where the air is dim and close. Smoke has darkened the upper surfaces. The floor feels firm, carefully prepared, perhaps renewed many times. A child may sleep here. Grain may be sorted here. A meal may be shared here. Yet, beneath that same surface, someone once opened the earth, placed the dead below, and sealed the house again. Life continued overhead, not in denial of death, but in a strange closeness with it. Archaeological records from Jericho confirmed the discovery of human burials beneath domestic floors, along with extraordinary plastered skulls from later pre-pottery Neolithic levels. Scholars connected with major museums and universities, including Oxford and American research institutions, have treated these finds as central evidence for early ancestor practices. The dead were not always hidden from thought. In some cases, they were reshaped into objects of memory. The plastered skulls are among the most haunting finds in early archaeology. A human skull without, as separated from the body, covered with plaster to recreate facial features, and sometimes given shell eyes. The result is neither a simple portrait nor a mask in the modern sense. It is something suspended between person, object, ancestor, and presence. You cannot look at it casually, even in a museum case. It looks back, the face is quiet. That is the troubling part. You imagine the process without rushing toward horror. Someone retrieves the skull after the body has decayed or been treated. Someone applies plaster with care, shaping cheeks, nose, and brow. Someone presses shells into the place of eyes. The features are not random. They suggest attention, perhaps affection, perhaps power. Whether these were beloved ancestors, revered elders, family founders, or ritual figures remains debated. The people did not explain themselves in writing, which is very inconsiderate at this exact moment. A quirky fringe tidbit has followed these skulls for decades. Popular writers sometimes describe them as ancient portraits, spirit vessels, or even evidence of a forgotten cult guarding secret knowledge. The more imaginative versions wander boldly into mist, carrying no map and very little evidence. Yet the fascination is understandable. These skulls feel personal. They do not resemble distant monuments. They resemble faces returned from the earth. The mainstream interpretation remains more careful. Many archaeologists see them as part of ancestor veneration, a way of maintaining relationships between living households and important dead. Research in Near East and Neolithic studies has connected such practices to questions of memory, property, identity, and belonging. If a family keeps the face of an ancestor, that ancestor may silently strengthen claims to a house, a lineage, a place, or a shared past. That idea changes the house around you. The walls no longer enclose only present activity. They enclose remembered authority. The dead beneath the floor may not simply be gone. They may help define who belongs inside. They may make the house older than its living occupants. They may say without words, "This place did not begin with you." Your mind drifts to evening. A lamp or fire gives low light. Shadows move across plastered walls. People gather close while wind brushes the outer surface of the dwelling. A skull, perhaps stored or displayed for certain moments, catches the light in its shell eyes. No one gasps dramatically, because this is not a theatrical scene for modern nerves. For them, it may be solemn, familiar, necessary. The dead are near. Nearness is the point. An open scholarly debate remains unresolved. Some researchers argue that the skulls represent household ancestors tied to kinship and claims over domestic space. Others suggest wider ritual functions, perhaps involving community identity, social ranking, or rites that created bonds beyond a single family. Still others caution that the category of ancestor may oversimplify practices that varied across time and place. The skulls are human, intimate, and deliberately altered, but their exact meaning stays beyond reach. You kneel beside the imagined floor and feel how strange permanence becomes when the dead are built into it. In a wandering life, memory travels through speech, objects, and bodies. In a settled place, memory can enter architecture. A burial under a floor anchors a person to a house. A house anchors a group to a mound. A mound anchors generations to a spring. Slowly belonging becomes vertical. The living stand above the dead. This vertical memory may have shaped how people understood time, not as a line moving forward into the future, but as layers beneath the feet. Grandparents, founders, infants, remembered faces, forgotten bones, all resting below ordinary tasks. A person grinding grain may do so over the buried presence of kin. A child may learn to walk above someone whose name is already fading. The everyday and the sacred share the same floor. There is a tenderness in that and also pressure. Ancestors can comfort, but they can also watch. They can bless, but they can also demand. A community that keeps the dead nearby may feel supported by them, yet also bound by them. You can almost hear someone saying, not in words preserved for us, but in the deep grammar of custom, "Do not abandon this house. Your people are here. The skulls also raise questions about identity. Were they made to resemble the living person closely, or to create an ideal ancestral face? Did people remember the individual, or did the plaster transform that person into something broader? The shell eyes are especially powerful. They do not see, of course, but human minds are made to respond to eyes. Even false eyes can create the feeling of presence. The dead become socially active. Eye through the face. It is a small psychological miracle and also a little rude of the brain. You know the object cannot watch you. You feel watched anyway. This is why the finds are so famous. They collapse distance. A wall can be admired as architecture. A tool can be understood as technology. A plastered skull stands at the border between affection and fear. It reminds you that early settled people were not merely solving practical problems. They were negotiating grief, memory, status, and the unbearable fact that the people who define a home eventually leave it. Outside the house, the settlement continues with its ordinary noise. Someone pours water. Someone snaps a dry stem for fuel. A child calls for attention. A person coughs in the smoke. Life does not pause for the dead, not completely. Instead, it makes room for them. It places them beneath floors, shapes their faces in plaster, and folds them into the architecture of staying. You may wonder whether this closeness made death less lonely. Perhaps a person did not vanish into a distant field or unknown grave. Perhaps the dead remained inside the circle of food, warmth, stories, and sleep. Or perhaps the practice carried anxiety, a need to control what death had taken. Both can be true. Human rituals often hold love and fear in the same hand. The darkness deepens. The house becomes a pool of shadow around a low fire. The plastered face glows faintly, not alive, not absent. The living breathe around it. The buried dead rest below, above them. The roof holds out the night. And in this quiet chamber, the mystery of Jericho becomes more intimate than stone towers or shunt walls. It is the mystery of people learning to remain, while the dead remain with them. It is the old human wish that memory might have a body, that loss might still have a face, and that home might be strong enough to hold both the living and those who have gone silent. Your attention returns to the line of stones that circles part of the ancient settlement. Because the wall is never only a wall, it is a question built in stone. It stands at the edge of a world where people are learning to stay. And it asks what staying required. Fear, planning, labor, memory, or perhaps all of them pressed together like mud between stones. You approach it in the morning light when the valley is still gentle and the heat has not yet hardened the air. The stones are irregular, not cut into elegant blocks. Yet, they hold a rough intelligence. Their weight has been gathered, carried, and set in place by human choice. The wall does not grow from the earth like a cliff. It is an interruption. Someone decided that this line mattered. At first, the simplest explanation seems obvious. Walls are for defense. A group that builds a wall must be worried about attack, and a worried group must have enemies. That is the tidy version, very attractive to the modern mind, which enjoys turning every old stone into evidence of conflict. Yet Jericho refuses to be that easy. The early wall may have protected people, but from what exactly remains uncertain. Archaeological findings confirm that Jericho's early stone wall belongs to one of the most remarkable building programs of the pre-pottery Neolithic world. Studies discussed in major archaeological circles, including work connected to Oxford, Cambridge, and American universities, describe the wall and tower as evidence of organized communal construction. What remains debated is purpose. The structure is real. Its meaning is still a sleeping animal under the sand. Imagine the settlement at the edge of seasonal danger. Heavy rains may fall in the surrounding highlands, sending water and debris rushing toward lower ground. In a dry landscape, flood does not always arrive politely. It can come as sudden force carrying mud, stone, branches, and panic. A wall might help divert such danger. It might protect homes from water as much as from people. In that case, Jericho's great boundary would be less a fortress and more a survival machine. The eye. D feels practical. You can picture residents watching dark clouds gather over distant hills. The air changes, birds shift, the smell of dust sharpens before rain. Someone remembers a previous flood that tore through a vulnerable place, ruined stored food, or carried away a wall of mud brick. Memory becomes design. Fear becomes engineering. But then there is the defensive interpretation. It has not disappeared. A settlement with stored food, water, and built houses could attract attention. In a world of scarcity, a place that keeps surplus becomes both secure and vulnerable. Others may want access to its spring, its grain, its shelter, or its social world. A wall could mark refusal. It could slow a raid, channel movement, or remind outsiders that this place has guardians. This is where the debate opens into shadow. Some scholars argue that fortification is plausible, especially because later settlements clearly used walls for defense. Others caution that early Neolithic conflict is difficult to prove from architecture alone. A wall can defend against raiders, water, animals, wind, erosion, or even anxiety itself. The evidence allows several readings, and each reading changes the emotional landscape of Jericho. There is also a symbolic possibility. A boundary can divide more than safe and unsafe space. It can divide the familiar from the wild, the living from the unknown, the remembered from the unclaimed. To cross a wall line is to move between categories. The wall may have taught people where belonging began. It may have shaped daily behavior, ritual movement, and the quiet drama of entrance and exit. A quirky fringe tidbit has grown around this uncertainty. Some modern enthusiasts have imagined the wall as proof of a vanished war, an ancient flood system designed by forgotten engineers, or even a sacred enclosure aligned with invisible energies in the land. The last idea tends to arrive with suspicious confidence and very little dust on its boots. Still, the impulse is revealing. When evidence is incomplete, the human mind builds its own wall and calls it explanation. You place yourself at the base of the stones. The texture is rough under your palm. Grit collects in the lines of your skin. Small shadows gather between the rocks. The wall would not be smooth or imposing like a later imperial fortification. Yet, it would change how the settlement felt. Standing inside it, you might feel held. Standing outside it, you might feel assessed. The wall creates inside and outside. That changes everything. Inside there are hearths, sleeping spaces, stored food, ancestors, and voices. Outside there are open distances, animals, strangers, storms, and the difficult freedom of the wider landscape. The wall does not erase danger, but it organizes fear. It gives fear a shape. Humans have always been comforted by shaped fear, even when the shape is not enough. Think of the labor required. Stones do not gather themselves despite showing absolutely no initiative in that matter. People had to collect them from nearby sources, carry them in baskets or by hand, arrange work parties, settle disagreements, and maintain the structure after damage. A wall is not just a moment of construction. It is a long relationship. It needs repairs, attention, and renewed agreement that the effort is still worth it. That agreement may reveal early politics without written law. Who decided where the wall should run? Who organized the work? Who contributed labor? Did every household owe time? Did some people lead because of age, skill, ritual authority, or control over food? The wall does not answer directly, but it hints that community life already involved obligation. Settlement is not passive. It requires negotiation, and negotiation is rarely as peaceful as museum labels suggest. Your mind drifts to a day of building. The sun climbs, bodies bend, baskets creak under stone. Someone calls instructions. Someone else complains that the stones are too large, which is both accurate and unhelpful. Dust sticks to sweat. Children watch from the side, learning that belonging includes labor. Elders remember where water once ran or where ground once shifted. The wall grows through memory as much as muscle. The open scholarly debate becomes richer when the environment is considered. Researchers studying ancient landscapes note that early communities faced shifting climates, unpredictable rainfall, and changing resource zones. Some interpret Jericho structures as practical adaptations to local hazards. Others emphasize the social meaning of building on such a scale. The disagreement is not merely about a wall. It is about whether early permanence was driven first by danger, identity, environment, or ritual imagination. Perhaps the truth lies in the refusal to choose. A wall can manage floodwater and impress neighbors. It can protect stores and define sacred space. It can symbolize unity and conceal inequality. Human structures often do several things at once because humans rarely build for one reason only. Even a modern fence may keep out dogs, mark property, annoy neighbors, and make someone feel important. Evening approaches, and the wall changes again. Shadows lengthen along its base. The stones lose their heat slowly outside the boundary. The land becomes less readable. Shapes blur into low darkness. Inside, fires begin to glow and voices gather closer to home. If you were born here, the wall might feel as natural as the spring. If you arrived from elsewhere, it might feel like a warning. You pause at an entrance or break in the line where movement must narrow. This is a powerful place in any settlement. People pass through with water, tools, animals, news, and worry. Outsiders may be watched. Insiders may be counted without numbers. Boundaries create rituals of crossing, even when nobody calls them rituals. A glance, a greeting, a question, a pause. The wall teaches the body to notice transition. There is no final answer carved in to the stones. No builder left a statement saying, "This wall is for floods," or "This wall is for enemies," or "This wall is for the comfort of future archaeologists." The silence is frustrating, but also fitting. Jericho belongs to a stage of human history when meaning is built. Buried and inferred from traces, the wall remains a slow question. It asks whether the first settled communities feared nature, strangers, disorder, memory, or the loss of the place they had made. It asks whether humans built boundaries because danger existed outside or because belonging needed an edge. And as the night gathers around the old stones, you may feel that the answer is not one thing, but a ring of possibilities, each touching the next, in the dark. You move through a settlement that exists before the usual signs of civilization arrive, and that is what makes it so quietly difficult to understand. There are no written tablets stacked in archives. There are no tax lists, no royal seals, no carved victories, no grand avenues designed to make ordinary people feel appropriately small. There is no obvious palace where power sits with its elbows on the table. Yet, people live here together. They sleep near one another, work near one another, bury their dead near one another, and organize tasks that no single household could complete alone. The settlement is not a city in the later imperial sense, but it is not merely a camp either. It rests in that fascinating middle ground where humanity begins testing the shape of community before inventing the full machinery of the state. You notice this most clearly in movement. Footpaths form where feet repeat the same choices. A route to the spring becomes worn. A space near a hearth becomes familiar. A narrow gap between buildings becomes a passage, then almost a street, though no planner has drawn it. Order grows from use. People do not need blueprints to create patterns. They only need to return. A mainstream historical fact studies the scene. Archaeologists identify early Jericho as one of the largest known settlements of its time in the southern Levant, with substantial architecture and evidence for long occupation. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Stanford, and the University of Chicago have used early Neolithic sites to study how communities developed social coordination before formal states. Jericho belongs to this crucial problem. M in human history. The problem is simple to ask and hard to answer. How do people cooperate when there is no king, no police force, no written contract, and no official office with a bored clerk behind a desk? The modern mind often assumes organization must descend from authority, yet early settlements suggest something subtler. Cooperation can grow from kinship, custom, shared danger, ritual expectation, seasonal labor, and the very human fear of being judged by neighbors. That fear is ancient, probably older than walls. In a place like Jericho, reputation matters. A person who refuses work, steals food, neglects obligations, or insults the wrong elder may not face a written court. They may face something more immediate: whispering, exclusion, loss of marriage prospects, fewer helping hands when illness comes. In a close settlement, social memory can be sharper than law. Everyone knows, and everyone remembers more than is convenient. You pass a cluster of houses where smoke rises from roof openings and doorways. The homes do not stand like separate modern properties, each pretending to be an island. They press into one another through sound, smell, labor, and shared space. You hear grinding stones from one side, a child fussing from another, and the slap of wet clay being applied somewhere nearby. Privacy is thin. Community is thick. This thickness has advantages. If a roof fails, neighbors can help repair it. If sickness enters one house, others may bring food or care. If danger approaches, many eyes notice. If a child wanders, someone sees. The settlement becomes a safety net made of people, memory, obligation, and occasional irritation. Very ancient, very familiar. It also brings tension. Stored resources create comparison. One household may have more grain, better tools, stronger workers, or more respected dead beneath its floor. Another may struggle. Unevenness appears long before kings build palaces. It begins quietly. In who has surplus, who lends, who borrows, who hosts gatherings, and who can ask favors without sounding desperate. A quirky tidbit from early settlement studies is that some archaeologists look at rubbish with almost heroic seriousness. Ancient trash can reveal diet, craft, household habits, and patterns of sharing. To the rest of us, a refuge pit may seem like a sad little hole of broken things. To an archaeologist, it can be a biography, fee that forgot to be polite. Jericho's discarded materials help reconstruct the living settlement behind the famous stones. You imagine a refuse area near the edge of activity. Broken tools, ash, plant remains, animal bones, and fragments of worn material gather there. The smell is not gentle. Flies are ambitious. Yet even this unpleasant place has structure. What people throw away, where they throw it, and how often they clear it all speak of routine. Civilization does not begin only with monuments. It begins when even rubbish has a pattern. The settlement contains no known writing, but it contains information. Marks in walls, placement of objects, repeated house forms, food remains, burials, tools, and paths all hold meaning. Archaeologists read them as a kind of mute archive. It is imperfect. Yes, it is like trying to understand a conversation by studying the chairs afterward. Still, patterns remain. Human behavior leaves pressure marks on the world. An open, scholarly debate concerns whether places like Jericho should be described as proto-urban, large villages, or something outside later categories. Some researchers argue that the absence of writing, formal administration, and circa Lear class hierarchy makes the word city misleading. Others suggest that size, permanence, architecture, and communal works deserve a broader definition. The disagreement reveals more than terminology. It asks what a city truly is. Is a city a population size? Is it a kind of government? Is it a marketplace, a shrine center, a fortification, a density of strangers, or a place where people cannot all know one another? Early Jericho complicates every answer. Its people may not have been urban in the later sense, but they were already living inside a shared human structure larger than the household. You feel that structure as the day moves on. Tasks overlap. Some people prepare food, while others work on buildings. Some gather plants outside the settlement. Some repair tools. Some carry water repeatedly because water is generous only when people keep fetching it. Each task depends on others. No one eats architecture. No one survives on ritual alone. The settlement works because many kinds of labor meet one another. Children are everywhere in this imagined world. They chase, carry, watch, learn, and interrupt with excellent timing. They absorb the map of the settlement with their bodies before they can explain it. They know which adults are kind, which are stern, where the dogs lurk, where the mud is soft, and which spaces are forbidden. Through them, the settlement teaches itself to continue. Elders matter too. In a world without written records, memory has authority. An elder may remember old flood paths, useful plant areas, kinship ties, previous disputes, ritual procedures, and the histories of houses. Memory is not nostalgia here. It is infrastructure. A community that forgets too much becomes vulnerable. A community that remembers too rigidly becomes trapped. Jericho must have balanced both forces in ways now mostly invisible. You stand in a central open space, if such a space exists in the shifting arrangement, and listen to the settlement breathing. There is no market roar, no temple chant preserved in writing, no official announcement. There is only the low hum of coordinated life. People do not need to name their society as complex for it to be complex. Complexity is often felt before it is described. The hidden structure of Jericho is therefore not a throne room. It is a network of obligations. It lies in who shares food, who maintains walls, who prepares, res the dead, who teaches children, who controls access to stored goods, and who can persuade others when danger or work demands action. Power may move through age, skill, memory, ritual, generosity, and pressure. It may not stand still long enough to become a crown. As night settles, the houses darken one by one. Fires glow low. The spring continues beyond the dwellings, and the paths between homes fade into shadow. Nothing about the place resembles a later capital. Yet something Sitiaiki has begun in the closeness, repetition, and shared dependence of many lives gathered around one enduring place. Jericho does not need a palace to matter. It does not need writing to remember. It does not need a king to reveal organization. It shows a quieter truth, older and perhaps more unsettling. Before civilization became official, humanity was already building the habits that would make civilization possible. The smell of grain is quieter than the smell of smoke, but it may have changed the world more deeply. You sense it in the dim interiors where seeds are gathered, dried, guarded, and measured without numbers written on clay. Food is not only eaten here, it is stored. It waits in shadow, circa, arraying tomorrow inside its small, hard body. That waiting is powerful. In a world of movement, food is often found day by day, season by season, place by place. In a settled community, food can be gathered into one location and protected through time. The future becomes something you can touch. A basket of grain is not just a meal delayed. It is a promise, a temptation, a responsibility. And perhaps the first quiet foundation of power. You enter a household space where stored plant foods might rest away from dampness, animals, and careless hands. The air is dry, dusty, and faintly sweet with crushed seed. A woven container leans against a wall. Nearby, stone tools wait for grinding and cutting. The scene looks humble, almost domestic, yet it contains a revolution with sore knees and tired wrists. Records from early Neolithic studies confirm that communities in the Levant increasingly relied on wild and gradually managed cereals during this long period of settlement change. Researchers at Stanford, Harvard, and other major institutions have examined how the transition toward agriculture reshaped diet, labor, health, and social organization. Jericho stands within this broader transfer, formation where gathering, cultivation, storage, and permanence begin to tighten around one another. You may imagine agriculture as a brilliant invention, greeted with cheerful applause by sensible villagers. The reality was probably less tidy. Growing and processing grain requires work, patience, timing, and risk. Fields can fail. Stored food can rot. Pests can invade. Neighbors can borrow and forget to return. A tradition that appears to have survived magnificently. Farming does not simply free humanity. It also binds humanity to schedules. The grain must be watched. It must be harvested at the right moment, dried properly, protected from dampness, and kept from animals. The tools for processing it must be made and maintained. The labor falls somewhere, and it often falls heavily. Grinding grain takes hours, and the motion repeats until shoulders ache and hands harden. Food security is built from bodies wearing themselves down. A mainstream historical fact rests inside this labor. The Neolithic shift toward cultivated plants and managed food production did not happen all at once, but unfolded across generations in the Fertile Crescent and surrounding regions. Jericho's early occupation. Tion belongs to that wider story where settled life encouraged more intensive use of cereals and other resources. The first food systems were not neat revolutions, they were slow entanglements. Your attention moves beyond grain to animals. Goats, sheep, and other managed species become increasingly important in the Neolithic world. Though the exact timing and local patterns vary, early Jericho sits in a landscape where hunting remains important, yet the long movement toward animal management is gathering force across the region. A goat is not just meat with legs, it is milk, hide, dung, movement, trouble, and personality. Often more personality than anyone requested. Animal management changes space, pens, paths, grazing zones, refuse areas, and seasonal routines begin shaping daily decisions. People must think about fodder, breeding, protection, and the inconvenient ambitions of animals. A herd can feed a community, but it can also wander, sicken, or damage crops. The line between wealth and headache becomes attractively fuzzy. A quirky tidbit belongs to animal dung, that unglamorous substance without which early settlement studies would be strangely incomplete. Dung can serve as fuel, building material, fertilizer, and archaeological evidence. It preserves traces of diet, environment, and animal presence. So, yes, one of civilization's quiet engines may have been carefully dried manure. Humanity reached permanence by many paths, not all of them elegant. Storage also changes relationships between people. When food is held in one place, questions follow. Who owns it? Who guards it? Who distributes it? Who receives help in hunger? Who decides that a family has taken enough? These questions may sound administrative, but they begin emotionally. A hungry child is not a theory. A half-empty store is not an abstract economic model. It is fear in a basket. You imagine a difficult season. Rainfall has disappointed. Wild plants are thinner. Hunting is less certain. A household with fuller stores becomes important. Another household may need help. Sharing strengthens bonds, but it also creates debt. Refusing may protect survival, but it can wound reputation. Generosity can become influence. Need can become dependence. Power does not need a throne. Sometimes it sits beside a storage bin. An open scholarly debate concerns whether food storage in early Neolithic community encouraged inequality from the beginning, or whether many groups maintained strong sharing norms for long periods. Some archaeologists argue that surplus allowed certain households or leaders to gain influence. Others stress cooperation, communal risk management, and the absence of clear elite markers in many early contexts. The debate continues because inequality can begin softly before it builds itself a palace. You see how subtle it could be. One person controls access to a storage room. Another knows the best planting area. Another has kin across the valley and can call on support. Another leads rituals that bless harvests or calm fear. Influence gathers in different hands like grain poured slowly into containers. At first, no one calls it rule. They call it help, wisdom, luck, obligation, or tradition. The spring remains vital to all of this. Water shapes, planting, drinking, cleaning, plaster mixing, animal care, and daily movement. A settlement near reliable water can store possibility more effectively than a wandering group in harsher surroundings. The spring does not create agriculture by itself. Of course, it creates conditions where staying makes sense. And staying makes sense. Storage more valuable. Then storage makes staying harder to abandon. The smell of cooking rises at dusk. Crushed grain becomes porridge. Flat cakes or simple meals prepared with whatever else the season offers. Smoke curls under roofs and through openings. Children wait too close to the hearth. Someone stirs with a practiced rhythm. Someone complains about portion size, proving again that civilization is mostly food, family, and disappointment managed indoors. Yet eating together is not trivial. Meals create social order. Who eats first? Who serves? Who receives the best portion? Who is invited? Who is excluded? Food does not merely satisfy bodies, it arranges them around the hearth. Relationships become visible. A community's deepest rules may appear in the way bread is broken, grain is shared, and hunger is answered. The hidden power of Jericho may therefore begin not with stone but with stored life. Seeds gathered into baskets, animals watched near settlement edges, labor organized around seasonal cycles, food protected against weather, pests, strangers, and scarcity. In these practical acts, humanity begins to negotiate the future more intensely than ever before. You pause in the dimness and listen. Grain shifts softly as a container is moved. A grinding stone rests after the day's work. Outside, an animal bleats into the evening. The sound is ordinary, almost sleepy. Yet, it carries the shape of a new world. People are no longer only following food across the landscape. They are drawing food toward themselves, holding it, guarding it, and building their lives around its return. That is a dangerous magic. Perhaps every city begins with such magic. Not in towers, not in crowns, not in carved names, but in the decision to keep tomorrow in a dark corner of the house. A handful of seeds becomes a season becomes a promise becomes a claim. And, from those small stored futures, the long story of settled human power begins to unfold. The dust does not merely cover things in Jericho, it receives them. It settles over broken tools, over forgotten hearths, over footprints, over offerings that may not look like offerings anymore. It softens the edges of life until meaning becomes difficult to separate from accident. Yet, certain traces still seem deliberate. A placed object, a prepared floor, a face remade in plaster, a space treated differently from ordinary space. This is where ritual begins to breathe. You stand near a household at the edge of evening, while the last warmth leaves the walls and smoke curls upward in thin grey ribbons. The settlement is not filled with temples in the later sense. No towering sanctuary rises with columns, priests, and carved divine processions. The sacred here, if that word is safe, seems closer to the ground. It lives in houses, floors, thresholds, bodies, food, and repeated gestures. That closeness matters. Modern people often separate religion from daily routine, at least in theory, while failing hilariously in practice. In early Jericho, the boundary may have been far thinner. Preparing food, burying kin, renewing plaster, marking space, sharing meals, and gathering near significant structures may all have carried meanings now difficult to untangle. The sacred may have arrived quietly, disguised as habit. Archaeological evidence from Neolithic communities across the Levant confirms that ritual life often appeared in domestic and communal settings before the rise of later temple systems. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have examined how shrines, burials, special buildings, and repeated practices reveal early symbolic worlds. Jericho contributes to this larger picture through its burials, plastered remains, unusual architecture, and carefully made domestic surfaces. You see a small object in the mind's eye, perhaps a stone, a bead, a bone tool, or a shaped piece of material kept longer than usefulness alone requires. Such things can be hard for archaeologists to classify. Was it a tool, a charm, a toy, a marker, a memory piece, or just the ancient equivalent of a drawer full of things someone insisted might be useful someday? The past enjoys making certainty uncomfortable. A quirky tidbit comes from small Neolithic figurines found across wider regions of the Near East. Some are simple, abstract, and difficult to interpret. Yet, they have inspired grand theories about fertility, household protection, identity, or ancestor presence. The problem is that a tiny object can carry a very large, scholarly argument. It can also have been made by someone experimenting with clay, bored during a long afternoon. Both possibilities deserve humility. In Jericho, ritual may not have required dramatic objects. It may have lived in a titian, a floor renewed at certain moments, a burial reopened, a skull treated carefully, a meal shared with specific people, a wall repaired with words spoken under the breath, a child introduced to a place where older bones lay hidden. These actions leave only partial traces, but they may have shaped the emotional order of the settlement. The air cools, and you hear distant voices near the spring. Water in many ancient societies becomes more than a resource. It becomes a focus of awe because it rises from hidden places and keeps life from failing. A spring in a dry valley does not need a myth to feel miraculous. It only needs thirsty people. Yet people are myth-making creatures. So the water may have gathered stories around itself, like reeds around its edge. There is no preserved Jericho hymn from 9000 BC. No prayer survives in writing. No priestly instruction tells you what to think. This absence is not emptiness, but silence. You must listen differently. You listen to where people place their dead. You listen to the labor invested in plaster. You listen to architecture that exceeds simple need. You listen to the settlement's repeated gestures because repetition is how invisible beliefs become visible. An open scholarly debate concerns how far archaeologists can go when interpreting early ritual. Some researchers argue that unusual burials, special buildings, and symbolic objects reveal organized belief systems. Others warned that modern categories like religion, ancestor, cult, shrine, or priest may distort societies that organized meaning differently. The debate remains careful because ritual does not fossilize neatly. It leaves footprints, not explanations. You walk past an entrance, and the threshold seems important. Every doorway divides inside from outside, family from stranger, warmth from night, known from uncertain. People may step across casually most days, yet thresholds often attract gestures in many human societies. A pause, a touch, a word, a placed object, a buried token. Jericho may have had its own quiet grammar of crossing, though only fragments remain. The scent of smoke thickens. It carries cooked grain, dry wood, perhaps dung fuel, and the faint bitterness of ash. Fire itself must have held deep significance, even when used practically. It transforms food, hardens materials, warms bodies, drives away darkness, and changes stone into plaque. Stir. People who control fire do not simply survive the night. They alter substances. They watch matter become something else. That transformation might have shaped imagination. Limestone becomes plaster. Seed becomes food. Body becomes ancestor. House becomes memory. Dust becomes mound. The world is always changing form, and early ritual may have offered ways to guide, honor, or endure those changes. Perhaps ritual is what people do when transformation matters too much to leave unexplained. A small gathering forms in your imagination. Not a grand ceremony, not a spectacle, just several people in low light. Their faces are half visible. One holds an object, another speaks quietly. A child watches without understanding, which is often how traditions survive. The adults do not perform for distant historians. They act for their own dead, their own fears, their own hopes for rain, food, health, birth, or safe return. Perhaps no one calls it ritual. Perhaps they call it necessary. The settlement itself may have felt alive with presences, ancestors below floors, water rising from darkness, stones set by elders, paths worn by generations, animals moving at the edge of vision, stars returning, and patterns no one wrote down, but many watched. The sky above Jericho would have been immense at night, sharp with unfamiliar brightness to modern eyes. Without city lights, darkness is not empty. It is crowded with signals. You look upward and feel that sky pressing close. The Milky Way stretches like pale dust across the blackness. Seasonal stars may guide movement, memory, and expectation. Even without formal astronomy, people notice recurring lights. They notice the sun's path, moon phases, heat changes, animal behaviors, and plant cycles. Ritual may emerge from noticing, then repeating, then trusting the repetition. Mainstream research on early farming communities often stresses that symbolic behavior was not a late luxury. It developed alongside practical survival. People did not first become secure, then spiritual. They made meaning while hungry, tired, vulnerable, and observant. That is, perhaps, more honest. The sacred is not always born in abundance. Sometimes it appears because life is fragile. In the dust at your feet, a small depression catches shadow. It might be a post hole, a pit, a storage feature, a burial cut, or nothing meaningful at all. Archaeology is full of such cautious possibilities, yet the uncertainty itself teaches patience. Early Jericho does not offer a finished religion. It offers a world where the living, the dead, the spring, the house, the wall, the tower, the grain, and the sky all seem connected through acts repeated over time. The night deepens, voices fall. The last hearths glow red, then dull. Somewhere a person places something aside with care, not because it is valuable in a market, but because it matters in a way no market could measure. The object rests in shadow. The house breathes around it. The dead beneath the floor remains silent, and perhaps that is the truest shape of ritual in this ancient place. Not thunder, not spectacle, not certainty, but the quiet insistence that ordinary things can hold unseen weight. A bowl, a skull, a doorway, a spring, a smooth floor, a handful of ash. Each may carry a fragment of the world people believed they inhabited. Each may whisper that life here was never only practical, never only survival, never only stone and grain. It was meaning pressed into dust. The valley can seem eternal when the evening light lies gently across it, but no settlement lives outside danger. Jericho stands near water, warmth, plants, animals, and travel routes. Yet each blessing carries a shadow. The spring gives life, but the land around it can still dry. The low ground offers shelter, but sudden water can move with violence. Stored food promises tomorrow, but tomorrow may arrive with insects, illness, hunger, or strangers. You feel the first hint of catastrophe, not as noise, but as change. The air becomes still. Birds shift early. A haze settles over the hills. The spring continues its steady murmur, almost too calm against a sky that has forgotten mercy. People notice such things. They know the moods of the valley because their lives depend on noticing. A season does not need to fail completely to frighten a community. It only needs to hesitate. In early settled life, crisis is not an interruption to history. It is part of the design. A community that remains in one place becomes stronger in some ways but more vulnerable in others. Houses cannot walk away. Stored grain cannot easily migrate. Buried ancestors do not travel lightly. When the environment shifts, staying becomes a wager, and Jericho places that wager again and again. A mainstream historical fact sits beneath this fragile picture. Archaeological layers at Tell's Sultan show repeated phases of occupation, abandonment, rebuilding, and transformation across thousands of years. Researchers from major institutions, including British, European, and American archaeological programs, have used those layers to study how settlements respond to environmental stress and social change. Jericho is not one simple city. It is a long sequence of returns. The idea of return is powerful. People leave, or decline, or rebuild. Yet the mound keeps drawing human attention. Perhaps the spring is the reason. Perhaps memory holds the place. Perhaps the valley remains too useful to ignore. When homes collapse, new homes can rise above them. When walls fail, later hands can repair or replace. Disaster does not always end a place. Sometimes it buries one version of it and prepares another. You imagine a hard year. Plants are thinner along the margins. Hunting parties return with less. The stored grain looks smaller each time someone opens it. Adults speak in lower voices. Children sense unease without understanding its shape. The smell of cooking weakens. Meals stretch. Generosity becomes harder. And every household question usually calculates what it can risk. Hunger is not dramatic at first. It is careful. Then perhaps rain comes too fiercely. Dry channels awaken as brown water rushes through them, carrying stones, branches, silt, and noise. A wall built against one danger may resist, redirect, or fail. People shout through the storm. Mud walls soften, roofs leak. Stored food must be moved higher or protected. A child cries because adults are frightened, and children are excellent scholars of adult fear. Water is life. Water is also force. This double nature may have shaped how Jericho's people viewed their landscape. The same environment that made settlement possible could threaten settlement with sudden change. Modern observers, safely removed by time and plumbing, often prefer simple categories: fertile or barren, safe or dangerous. Ancient inhabitants lived the overlap. A spring was a gift, but a flood path was a warning written in mud. A quirky tidbit from archaeological interpretation is that destruction layers can be strangely seductive. Burned surfaces, collapsed walls, and sudden deposits invite dramatic stories, and humans do love a tidy disaster. Yet, not every ash layer means invasion, and Often every collapse means catastrophe. Sometimes a building burns by accident. Sometimes a wall falls because people are tired of maintaining it. The past contains tragedy. Yes, but also poor workmanship and bad luck. That caution matters. Jericho's deep history includes episodes of change that are difficult to explain neatly. Population may rise and fall. Structures may be abandoned. Cultural practices may shift. A burial custom appears, changes, or disappears. These transitions can reflect climate, disease, conflict, migration, social reorganization, or choices made for reasons now lost. The evidence is layered, but the motives remain shadowed. An open scholarly debate surrounds the role of climate in early Neolithic transformations. Some researchers emphasize environmental shifts, including changing rainfall patterns and resource pressures, as major drivers of settlement growth or decline. Others argue that social networks, ritual obligations, and human decisions were equally important, preventing climate from becoming a simple master explanation. The debate continues because weather leaves traces, but people interpret weather through culture. You walk across the mound during an intermission, a ginned dry season, and the ground sounds brittle underfoot. Dust rises at each step. The reeds near the water are still green, but beyond them, the valley seems tense. In the distance, heat blurs the edges of stone. A goat, if the community keeps one nearby, complains with impressive confidence about conditions no one can fix. The sound is almost comic until you remember that animals also need water and food. Stress changes a community. It can make people generous because survival depends on cooperation. It can also make them suspicious because scarcity sharpens every boundary. A household that once shared easily may begin to hold back. A leader who once advised may start commanding. A ritual that once comforted may become urgent. Crisis does not create society from nothing, but it reveals the hidden structure already there. You sense that hidden structure in the way people gather during uncertainty. Some look to elders who remember old shortages. Some look to skilled hunters, builders, healers, or those who know distant contacts. Some may look toward ritual specialists who speak for the dead, the spring, or the unseen order of things. In difficult times, practical and sacred IT often stand very close together. Hunger does not care which category modern scholars prefer. Perhaps sickness moves through the settlement. Close living can protect, but it can also carry disease. Smoke-filled interiors irritate lungs. Stored food attracts pests. Waste must be managed. Water can save and contaminated water can betray. Early settled life brings benefits, but also new risks born from density. The first communities may have discovered that home can shelter a person and trap a person at the same time. That is an unsettling thought. Still, people rebuild. The evidence of long occupation around Jericho suggests resilience, not uninterrupted success. Resilience is not romantic. It means damage happens and people continue anyway. It means walls crack, stores fail, children die, elders are buried, and someone eventually smooths plaster over a floor again. The continuity of a place is often made from grief, repeated until it becomes endurance. You stand near the mound as night comes after a difficult day. The settlement's fires burn fewer and lower. Smoke rises straight in still air. Someone checks a storage space. Someone ties a bundle. Someone listens for movement beyond. The dwellings. Fear is quieter than shouting. Now it has become watchfulness. Above the stars appear one by one. They are indifferent as stars usually are, which is poor manners from objects so beautiful. Yet, people may read them for seasons, direction, or reassurance. When the land becomes uncertain, the sky's repetition can feel merciful. The moon returns, certain stars return. Perhaps the rains will return. Perhaps the spring will continue. Perhaps staying remains possible. The history of Jericho is not a straight line from primitive shelter to glorious city. It is a rhythm of risk and response. Build, lose, repair, remember, gather, store, share, fear, bury, mourn, return. Each cycle adds to the mound. Each hardship leaves some trace, even if that trace is only a change in wall line, a different floor, a gap in occupation, or a custom altered without explanation. Catastrophe in deep time is rarely one great ending. More often, it is a series of pressures that change what people can bear. A dry generation, a violent season, a social fracture, a death that removes important memory, a conflict over food or water, a decision by some families to leave. These quiet catastrophes may shape history as powerfully as fires and collapsing walls. You look again toward the spring, still moving in the darkness. It is the old center of possibility. But even it does not guarantee safety. Nothing does. Not walls, not stored grain, not ancestors beneath floors, not rituals in dust. Yet together they form a human answer to uncertainty. They say that people will not simply drift, they will build, remember, organize, and try again. And so Jericho's mystery becomes less about whether disaster came and more about why the place continued to matter after disaster. The mound grows because life returns to it. The valley holds because people keep choosing it. Under the quiet stars, every rebuilt wall and renewed floor becomes a soft defiance against collapse. A fragile answer whispered into the long dark. The mound rises like a low island of memory, built not by one people in one lifetime, but by the slow weight of human return. You stand before it and sense that the earth is not flat time. It is stacked time. Under your feet lie houses under houses, floors under floors, hearths under hearths. Each layer pressed down by abandonment, rebuilding weather, ash, and patience. This is the city beneath cities. At first, the mound looks natural enough to a passing eye. A rounded hill, a dusty swell, a quiet height above the valley. Yet, it is largely made by human lives accumulating in place. When mud brick walls collapse, they become part of the ground. When new houses rise over old rooms, the settlement lifts itself slightly higher. When fires burn, floods deposit silt, and floors are renewed. The mound thickens. Time becomes architecture. Archaeologists call such a mound a tell, a layered settlement hill formed through repeated occupation. At Tel Esseltyn, the ancient mound of Jericho, excavators identified many phases from deep prehistory through later periods. Research traditions connected with British, Italian, Palestinian, and American scholarship have returned to these layers again and again. Because Jericho is not one discovery. It is a vertical archive. You imagine the excavation trench as a cut into memory. Its sides reveal bands of soil, plaster, ash, stone, and occupation, partition debris. Each color shift matters. Each surface may mark a floor where someone cooked, slept, argued, or mourned. Each buried wall may belong to a house that once felt complete, safe, and permanent. From above, the trench looks technical. From within, it feels almost intimate. The tools of excavation move carefully. Trowels scrape, brushes clear. Buckets lift soil away. Measuring strings stretch across squares. Labels are written with the solemn seriousness of people who understand that a misplaced object can confuse 1,000 years. The work may look slow, and it is archaeology, is patience with paperwork, which sounds less heroic than treasure hunting, but is much more useful. A mainstream historical fact gives this scene its authority. Kathleen Kenyon's method of excavating Jericho used careful stratigraphic techniques, helping establish clearer sequences of occupation at the site. Her work influenced Near Eastern archaeology by showing how deeply layered settlements could be read through their deposits. Later researchers have refined dates and interpretations, but the basic lesson remains powerful. Jericho must be understood layer by layer. Layering changes how you think about identity. The name Jericho can make the place sound singular, as though one community endured unchanged from 9000 BC onward. In truth, there were many Jerichos. Different houses, customs, populations, beliefs, technologies, and crises occupied the same favorable ground. The spring remained a constant attraction, but the people around it changed. A place can keep a name while becoming many worlds. Your mind drifts downward through the mound near the surface. Later periods lie closer to light. Beneath them are older remains, then older still, until the Neolithic levels appear like dreams at the bottom of memory. The deeper you go, the fewer familiar things remain. Pottery disappears, writing disappears, metal disappears. The world becomes mud, stone, bone, plaster, seed, ash, and silence. This descent feels almost like entering sleep. Each layer dims the present. You think of a house built over a house whose builders never knew the house below. A family sweeps its floor, unaware that another family once swept almost the same space centuries earlier. A child runs across packed earth, not knowing that another child may have fallen there long ago. Time at Jericho is not a line of isolate events. It is a compression of repeated human gestures. A quirky tidbit comes from the practical oddity of tells themselves. Ancient people often rebuilt on top of ruins because old walls, foundations, and debris created convenient platforms. So yes, part of the oldest urban history is basically humanity deciding that clearing everything properly was too much work. Future archaeologists are grateful. The original residents were probably just being sensible, tired, and short on alternatives. The mound preserves, but it also confuses. Later digging can cut through earlier layers. Roots disturb deposits. Animals burrow. Erosion removes evidence. Ancient people themselves reused stones, cleaned floors, dug pits, and rearranged their surroundings. Archaeologists do not uncover time like opening a book. They reconstruct it from pages stuck together, burned at the edges, and occasionally chewed by rodents. An open scholarly debate concerns the chronology of Jericho's many phases and how certain layers should be interpreted. Some discussions focus on radiocarbon dating pottery sequences in later periods and the relationship between archaeological evidence and traditional historical narrative. Others examine how early Neolithic layers fit into broader regional developments. The debate stays alive because every layer is a negotiation between evidence, method, and interpretation. In the trench, a small object emerges. Perhaps it is a flint blade worn smooth at the edge. Perhaps it is a bead, a bit of bone, or a fragment of plaster. Its scale is modest, but its position matters intensely. Found in one layer, it belongs to one moment found lower or higher. It tells a different story. Context is the soul of archaeology. Without context, even an ancient treasure becomes mostly a pretty confusion. You picture an excavator pausing not from drama, but from concentration. The object is photographed, measured, recorded, and removed. It enters a bag, a notebook, a catalogue, and eventually a scholarly argument. A person from 9000 BC drops or places something, and many thousands of years later, someone assigns it a number. History is touching and also wonderfully bureaucratic. The mound itself has suffered from this attention. Excavation reveals, but it also removes. Every trench is a controlled destruction because once soil is dug away, it cannot be put back with its original meaning intact. That is why recording matters so much. The archaeologist's notes become the second life of the site. If those notes are poor, the past loses its voice twice. You stand beside the cut earth, and feel the strange ethics of uncovering. To know Jericho, people must disturb it. To preserve Jericho, they must sometimes leave it buried. The hidden layers are safer in darkness, yet silent there. The exposed layers teach, but suffer air, sun, visitors, and time. Archaeology is not only discovery. It is responsibility. The city beneath cities also reshapes the question of age. When people ask whether Jericho is the oldest city on Earth, they often imagine a single continuous place, but the mound reveals a more complicated truth. Some phases flourish, some decline, some are abandoned or transformed. The claim of oldest city depends on what counts as a city, what counts as continuity, and how one weighs evidence from other early sites. Still, the depth is astonishing long before later walls, later houses, later legends, and later arguments. People had already made this mound meaningful. They had already lived, built, buried, stored, repaired, and returned. Their remains became the based on which later Jericho stood, often without knowing the full depth beneath them. Evening settles over the excavation. Shadows fill the trench first, pooling in the lower squares. The upper edges still hold a little gold light. Dust cools. Tools are set aside. The mound grows quiet again, as if relieved to keep some secrets for another night. You look across the layered earth and sense that Jericho is not merely old, it is accumulated. Its mystery is not one hidden chamber or one lost inscription. Its mystery is the weight of ordinary lives stacked into a hill, each generation believing itself present, each becoming ground for another. The city beneath cities waits in silence, not dead exactly, but folded, compressed, and still listening beneath the dust. The mound does not belong only to archaeologists. It also belongs to memory, and memory is never a quiet tenant. Long after the earliest builders vanished into soil, later peoples looked toward Jericho and filled it with stories. Some stories carried names, some carried warnings. Some carried the sound of trumpets, walls, faith, conquest, and divine promise. The place became more than a settlement. It became a symbol. Uap wrote that symbol carefully. The later fame of Jericho is inseparable from traditions preserved in biblical literature, especially the story of Joshua and the fall of the city. In that account, Jericho is not merely old ground near a spring. It is a threshold, a first obstacle, a place where history and sacred meaning collide. The walls become theatrical. The city becomes a test. The landscape becomes a stage for memory shaped by belief. Yet the earliest Jericho lies thousands of years deeper than that famous story. The people who built the Neolithic wall did not know the later tale. They did not write themselves into scripture. They did not imagine future readers debating chronology in libraries, classrooms, churches, universities, and extremely determined comment sections. They simply lived near water, stone, mud, grain, ancestors, and heat. This gap matters. It is vast. A mainstream historical fact grounds the discussion. The archaeological mound of Tel Sultan contains remains from many periods, including very early Neolithic levels and later Bronze Age occupations. Scholars from institutions such as Oxford, Harvard, and the University of Chicago have studied how archaeology ninth textual traditions intersect at sites like Jericho. The physical evidence and later written memory belong to different kinds of history, and they do not always speak the same language. Archaeology works through material traces. It asks what was built, burned, buried, eaten, repaired, abandoned, and reused. Textual tradition works through narrative meaning, identity, theology, and cultural memory. Both can preserve truths, but not always the same truths in the same form. A story may remember the emotional importance of a place while changing its sequence, scale, or explanation. A trench may preserve a flaw, yet say nothing about what anyone believed. This is where popular imagination often grows impatient. It wants archaeology either to prove a story completely or destroy it completely. Very dramatic, very convenient. Also, very rarely how ancient evidence behaves. Jericho's layers do not arrange themselves into simple victory or failure. They offer dates, destructions, gaps, structures, and questions. Interpretation then begins, and interpretation is where humility should enter the room, preferably before confidence takes all the chairs. You stand at the edge of the mound, and I'm Asian different observers arriving across time. A Neolithic builder sees a living settlement. A Bronze Age inhabitant sees a familiar town. A later storyteller sees a city charged with sacred meaning. A 19th century explorer sees a biblical landscape. A 20th century archaeologist sees stratigraphy. A modern visitor sees ruins, signs, fences, photographs, and the hot shimmer of expectation. Each one sees Jericho. None sees all of it. A quirky tidbit belongs to the early days of excavation and exploration, when some visitors arrived with firm expectations shaped by sacred texts and dramatic illustrations. Spades entered the ground carrying not only tools but assumptions. Some hoped to find fallen walls that would neatly match famous stories. The earth, being ancient and apparently fond of complications, did not always cooperate. Archaeology has spent much of its life gently disappointing people who wanted faster answers. That disappointment can be useful. It forces sharper questions. Which layer belongs to which period? What kind of destruction occurred? Was a wall defensive, domestic, collapsed, reused, or misdated? Do later traditions preserve memories of real places without matching them in every detail? Can a story be culturally true while not serving as a field report? These questions are not attacks on memory. They are ways of respecting complexity. An open scholarly debate surrounds the relationship between Jericho's archaeological record and later biblical narratives. Some scholars argue that certain destruction levels and settlement patterns complicate a literal reading of the famous conquest story. Others suggest that traditions may preserve older memories transformed by time, theology, and oral transmission. Many careful historians separate the much earlier Neolithic remains from later Bronze Age questions because confusing them produces impressive nonsense with footnotes. You can feel the temptation to merge everything: the oldest walls, the later walls, the story of trumpets, the tower in the earth, the ancient spring, the buried skulls. The name Jericho gathers them into one glowing mental image. But history asks you to slow down. The mound is layered, and so must be layered. Not every stone belongs to the same human fear. Not every collapse belongs to the same story. The air around you smells of dust, dry plants, and sun-warmed stone. A district. Sound travels across the valley. Perhaps a vehicle in the modern world, perhaps only wind in the imagination. The contrast is strange. You stand in a place where myths have gathered, yet the ground remains physical. Pebbles press against your soles. Heat collects at the back of your neck. The spring still matters more than argument. Myth and excavation meet most honestly when neither tries to swallow the other. Myth asks what a place meant to later communities. Excavation asks what people did in specific layers of time. Myth preserves drama. Excavation preserves debris. Myth remembers through pattern. Excavation remembers through context. Both can be misused. Both can also deepen the human picture when handled with care. You imagine a later storyteller speaking of Jericho by firelight. The city becomes a symbol of impossible barriers falling. The wall becomes obedience, judgment, triumph, terror, or miracle, depending on the listener. No one in that circle is thinking about pre-pottery Neolithic plaster technology. Honestly, fair enough. They are shaping identity. They are making sense of land, ancestry, danger, promise, and divine order. Then you imagine an archaeologist sent Aries later, kneeling in a trench with dust on their sleeves. The city becomes layers, features, samples, drawings, and cautious language. The wall becomes a construction phase. The burn layer becomes a question. The potcher becomes a clue. No one in that trench should ignore the power of later tradition. But neither should they force the soil to speak words it never preserved. Between these two figures, the storyteller and the excavator, Jericho becomes larger. It is not reduced to fact or legend. It becomes a meeting place where human beings reveal how they remember. One group remembers through sacred narrative, another remembers through scientific method. Both are trying in different ways to resist forgetting. The older levels whisper beneath both. Their builders have no surviving names in later texts. They are not heroes in the familiar stories. Yet, without them, the mound would not have gained its deep antiquity, its layered power, its almost magnetic pull on imagination. They are the first quiet voices in a long chorus, though later voices became louder and more famous. This is why the place feels slightly unsettling. A single name covers thousands of years of unrelated lives. Jericho is not one memory, but many memories sharing ground. When people say the city fell, which city do they mean? When they say the walls, which walls are they seeing? When they say oldest, are they speaking of settlement, urban life, continuity, or mythic fame? The questions multiply softly. They do not ruin the story. They deepen it as twilight settles. The mound seems to hold all these versions without choosing among them. The Neolithic settlement beneath the Bronze Age town, the later traditions, the excavated trenches, the modern visitors searching for something solid. Each layer has its own truth, and each truth becomes dangerous only when forced to do another layer's work. You leave the famous stories, neither dismissed nor blindly accepted. You let them stand where they belong, in the long afterlife of a place that kept attracting meaning. Jericho's archaeology does not need to become a weapon against memory. Memory does not need to become a cage around archaeology. Between them lies a quieter path where stone, soil, story, and belief remain distinct, yet strangely entangled. And in that entanglement, Jericho becomes more than the oldest city, more than a biblical symbol. More than a mound of scientific data. It becomes a mirror of how humans treat the past. We build on it, we bury it, we name it, we argue over it, we turn it into warning, promise, evidence, and dream. Then the dust settles again, patient as ever, waiting for the next hand to brush it aside. The question waits in the darkness, like a lamp turned low. Was Jericho truly the oldest city on earth, or only one of the oldest places where the evidence has survived clearly enough to trouble us? The answer depends on what you are willing to call a city, and the word itself is less stable than it first appears. It looks simple from a distance. It becomes slippery when held close. A city can mean size. It can mean walls. It can mean permanent houses. It can mean specialization, markets, government, religion, social ranking, or the feeling that too many people are living too close together and someone should really organize the refuse. By those later standards, early Jericho may seem incomplete, yet, by the standards of 9000 BC, it feels astonishingly bold. You stand once more on the mound with the spring below and the valley stretching outward beneath a wide sky. The air is warm. Dust moves softly around your feet. The old stones are buried, broken, exposed, interpreted, and argued over. Nothing here gives a simple answer, because the first city may not have arrived as a finished invention. It may have emerged as a threshold, one decision at a time. A mainstream historical fact remains essential. Jericho is widely regarded as one of the earliest known permanently occupied settlements with monumental stone architecture, especially because of its Neolithic wall and tower. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, Stanford, and leading archaeological institutes continue to place it among the most important sites for understanding early settled life. Yet other ancient sites, including those in Anatolia and the Levant, have complicated any single claim to absolute priority. That complication is important. History is not a race with a clean finish line. The oldest surviving evidence is not always the oldest reality. Earlier places may lie buried under rivers, cities, fields, seas, or modern buildings. Some may have vanished through erosion. Some may never be found. Some may be known but interpreted differently. The first city on Earth may not be the first city we can rove. Still, Jericho holds a special power because it makes the question visible. It gives the abstract beginning of settled life a shape, a mound, a spring, a wall, a tower, floors, burials, tools, grain, faces in plaster. These are not grand enough for later empires perhaps, but they are more intimate. They let you feel civilization before it becomes official. A quirky tidbit belongs to the competition for the title of oldest city. Many places across the world have been called the oldest living city, the oldest continuously inhabited city, or the oldest urban settlement, depending on the definition being quietly smuggled into the sentence. Damascus, Byblo, Aleppo, Erbil, and Jericho all appear in such conversations. The past apparently has a very crowded award ceremony, but Jericho's earliest claim is different from the claim of later historic cities. It reaches into prehistory, into a time before written civic identity. That makes it both more impressive and harder to define. A later city may show streets, texts, public buildings, markets, and administration. Jericho shows something earlier, softer around the edges, but deeply consequential. It shows people gathering around permain, NCE, before permanence has rules. The open scholarly debate remains central. Some researchers argue that early Jericho should be called a large Neolithic village rather than a true city because it lacks evidence for writing, formal bureaucracy, clear class hierarchy, and full urban complexity. Others suggest that using later definitions may blind us to earlier forms of urban becoming. The debate is not a technical nuisance. It changes how humanity imagines its own beginning. You feel the weight of that debate beneath your feet. If Jericho is not yet a city, then it is a doorway. If it is a city, then the story of cities begins earlier and more quietly than expected. Either way, the mound does not shrink. It remains a place where human beings altered their relationship with land, time, memory, food, death, and one another. Perhaps the better question is not whether Jericho was the first city. Perhaps the better question is what made a city possible. A reliable spring made it possible. Shared labor made it possible. Stored food made it possible. Ancestors beneath floors made it possible. Boundaries made it possible. Repetition made it possible. Trust made it possible. And so did fear. Cities are not built only from stone. They are built from agreements. Some spoken, some silent, some generous, some unequal, some remembered only through behavior. At Jericho, the agreements are gone, but their traces remain in architecture and soil. People agreed somehow to stay near one another. They agreed to work, repair, store, bury, protect, and return. That may be the oldest civic act. The word city usually makes you think of density and noise. Streets full of strangers, markets, temples, officials, rules. But early Jericho invites a slower image. A cluster of homes near water, smoke at dusk, a wall line in stone, children growing up with the same paths beneath their feet, elders whose memories helped the settlement endure, the dead kept close, the future stored in grain. This is not less profound because it is small. It may be more profound because it is small. You can still sense the human scale of it. The first steps toward urban life are not abstract, they are intimate. Someone repairs a floor, someone carries water, someone guards food, someone remembers a flood, someone shapes a face in plaster, someone teaches a child where not to wander. From such acts, the world bends. 4. The sky darkens above the valley. The ancient spring continues with a sound older than names. You imagine people sleeping inside the settlement, unaware that anyone would one day call their home a candidate for the oldest city on earth. They do not need the title. Titles belong to later people who arrive with maps, arguments, and a touching belief that categories can tame the dead. Jericho remains larger than the title. It is not only old, it is instructive. It teaches that civilization does not begin when someone writes a law or crowns a king. It begins earlier when people bind themselves to place and accept the burdens of return. It begins when the ground becomes memory and memory becomes obligation. The question remains open. That is fitting because the oldest city may not be a single point in time. It may be a long human turning repeated in different valleys, plains, riversides, and hills. Jericho is one of the clearest places where that turning can still be felt. It is a place where the earth seems to whisper that before history learned to speak, people were already building the conditions of history. And perhaps that is why Jericho still unsettles the mind. It does not owe humanity as simple, waiting for civilization to arrive from elsewhere. It shows humanity already restless, organized, afraid, inventive, and devoted to place. It shows the beginning not as a shout, but as a murmur around a spring, as stones placed in dust, as smoke rising over houses at dusk. So the answer remains soft. Jericho may be the oldest city, or one of the oldest, or something even more interesting than either label allows. It may be the place where the word city begins to form, not fully spoken, but already present in human behavior. And perhaps beneath all the arguments, that is enough. The mound grows quiet again. The valley loosens into night. The old spring continues to breathe from the hidden earth, and the stars return above the same low horizon. You do not need to solve every ancient question tonight. Some mysteries are better held gently than forced open. Jericho has waited thousands of years with its secrets layered beneath dust, stone, plaster, and silence. Let the warm air settle around you. Let the old walls fade into shadow. Let the tower sink back into the earth of memory. The people who lived there are gone, but their choice to remain still glows faintly in the dark. They stayed near water. They built. They remembered. They began something whose full shape they could never know. Now, the valley is still, the paths are empty, the houses are only traces beneath the mound. A soft wind moves across the reeds, and the night carries no final answer. It carries only the feeling of deep time, patient and wide, holding every forgotten footstep without judgment. And perhaps as your own thoughts grow slower, Jericho becomes less a question of first place and more a quiet invitation to rest, to listen, to imagine the earliest homes under the oldest stars. To understand that history is not only what survives in books, but what remains underfoot, waiting in silence. The spring flows on, the dust settles, the ancient city sleeps. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Word count 1462. End of script. Good night. Wind down. John suing trong me. The valley is quiet now, and there is nothing more you need to solve. Let Jericho rest where it has always rested, low in the warm darkness, near the old spring that still murmurs beneath the earth. The stones no longer ask for answers. The buried floors no longer need to be uncovered. The tower, the wall, the houses, and the hidden faces in plaster all sink softly back into the silence of deep time. You can let the questions loosen. Was it the first city, or one of the first? Was the wall built for danger, water, ritual, or belonging? Did the people know they were beginning something vast, or did they only know the weight of grain, the coolness of water, the comfort of a repaired floor? Perhaps they only stayed, and perhaps staying was enough. The night spreads over the Jordan Valley like a dark cloth. The reeds move gently. The spring continues its patient song. Above the mound, the stars return without hurry. The same stars that watched overhand, smoothing plaster. Children sleeping near hearths and elders listening to the wind beyond the wall. All those lives have passed into earth now, not vanished. Exactly. Folded, held, resting beneath the dust in layers too deep for memory, but not too deep for wonder. So, let your breathing slow with the old landscape. Let the heat fade. Let the stones cool. Let the ancient city become only a shape in the dark, soft at the edges, calm and distant. There is no need to follow the path any farther tonight. The spring flows on, the mound sleeps. Tea. The valley keeps its secrets, and perhaps somewhere beneath the quiet soil, the first dream of the city are still breathing.